But a little girl showed up at a border clinic with a man claiming to be her uncle. She barely spoke, eyes wide with something between fear and exhaustion. But when the doctor noticed the wrong name on her necklace and heard her murmur a different one in her sleep, everything changed. What began as a simple stomachache led to a horrifying discovery inside her body and a past she was never meant to remember. The desert sun was beginning to soften into a muted gold, casting long shadows across the dusty parking lot of the Mariposa Free Clinic. A one-story prefab building nestled just 5 miles north of the Arizona-Sonora border. Its faded sign creaked in the dry wind, and the automatic door wheezed as it opened, ushering in 2 figures whose arrival would shatter the clinic's nightly rhythm. The man, perhaps in his early 40s, had a coarse appearance, short-cropped hair, sun-darkened skin, and fingers calloused from hard labor. He guided a young girl beside him, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder, not in comfort, but in control. "Check in," he muttered gruffly to the receptionist, avoiding eye contact. His accent was heavy, but not unkind, as if the words dragged themselves reluctantly from his throat. "She's sick. Mira Solano, 11. The girl didn't speak. She clutched a faded pink backpack to her chest and kept her eyes trained on the floor tiles. Her face was gaunt, paler than one would expect for a child raised in the desert. Sweat clung to her temple despite the clinic's overactive air conditioning. When the receptionist smiled gently and asked Mira to confirm her date of birth, the man, Hector, answered instead. "March 3, 2013, he snapped. The girl flinched slightly but said nothing. Dr. Elias Navarro, on his 3rd month working night shifts at Mariposa, was reviewing case notes when his nurse, Janet, peeked into his office. "We've got a new walk-in. Young girl, abdominal pain, came in with her." She hesitated, then added, "She hasn't said a word. He's doing all the talking. Something feels off." Elias nodded, rising from his chair with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who'd seen too much and yet never enough. He glanced through the window into the waiting room and saw them, the man rigid, flipping through an old magazine without reading it, the girl sitting statue-still beside him, arms crossed over her middle, face hidden behind a curtain of limp brown hair. "Room 2, Janet murmured. "Vitals already taken, but she wouldn't drink any water." Elias frowned. "Dehydration?" "Possibly. But it's more than that. He refused water for her. Twice." Inside the small exam room, fluorescent lights buzzed above as Elias entered, the girl already on the exam table, Hector standing too close. "Evening," Elias greeted calmly, pulling up her chart. "So Mira's not feeling well." Hector nodded. "Stomach pain, just give us something for it, yeah?" He didn't sit. He didn't blink much either. "I'll need to ask Mira a few questions directly," Hector said. "Hers had helped to hear from the patient." Hector hesitated, then stepped half a foot back. Mira didn't look up. "Mira," Elias said gently, crouching so he was eye level. "Can you tell me when the pain started?" The girl's lips moved faintly, but no sound came. After a pause, she shook her head slightly. Hector interjected, "Just last night. She barely ate, just needs something to settle her stomach." Heller didn't respond. Instead, he focused on Mira again. "Can I ask, has she eaten anything unusual? Maybe drank some bad water?" Silence. Hector folded his arms, impatient. "She doesn't need a speech, just meds. She's shy." But Mira wasn't just shy. Her posture, her pale skin, the way she avoided the doctor's eyes, all of it screamed something else. Fear. Elias stood. "I'll do a quick exam," he said. He motioned to Hector. "You can stay, but I'll need space to check her abdomen." Hector huffed but backed off a few feet. Mira obeyed every instruction mechanically. She lifted her shirt with trembling fingers. Elisa's hands moved with practiced caution, palpating gently across her midsection. He felt rigidity. Tension. "Does it hurt here?" he asked, pressing near her right lower quadrant. Mira nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Okay," he said softly. "You're doing great." He stepped away and gestured for Hector to join him by the door. "I'd like to run an X-ray, just to rule things out." "X-ray? No, she's just got a bug. Give her something." Hector's voice was suddenly sharper, defensive. Elias met his gaze evenly. I can't prescribe anything without knowing the cause of her pain. An X-ray is a basic step. The air between them grew heavy. Finally, Hector muttered, "Fine." As Janet wheeled Mira toward radiology, Elias returned to his desk. He pulled up the girl's chart again, noting the absence of medical history. No vaccination record, no primary physician listed, just a name, a date of birth, and a T-point box in Douglas, Arizona. He stared at the screen, then turned toward the hallway window. Outside, Hector was pacing. Not worried pacing, but Radius was screaming. And instincts he'd learned near the border often meant the difference between saving someone or losing them forever. Back in his small office, cluttered with files and the faint aroma of antiseptic, Dr. Elias Navarra pulled the door shut behind him and sat down slowly, staring at the X-ray requisition screen as his mind replayed the encounter with the girl. There had been something in her eyes, not just pain, but a kind of silent plea, and her silence lingered like smoke in his memory. As he reached for the tablet to note down preliminary observations, Janet returned, her voice low and cautious. "She's in radiology now. Technician says she's very still. Didn't flinch. Didn't speak." Elias looked up. "And the man?" "Still pacing," she replied. But he looked at the camera just now, straight into it, like he knew where it was. Elias's brow furrowed fell with what he saw and followed. He stood and followed Janet to the viewing hallway that looked into the radiology room. Through the glass he saw Mira lying flat on the X-ray table, arms by her side, her face pale under the harsh lighting. Something glinted at her neck, a thin silver chain barely visible beneath the collar of her T-shirt. As the technician stepped out to adjust the machine, Mira's head lolled slightly, exposing the necklace fully for a moment. It held a small oval pendant, the kind sold in airport kiosks or gift stores, simple but distinct. On its surface was engraved a name. Elias narrowed his eyes. He leaned closer to the glass. Miriam L. It was subtle but clear. That name didn't appear anywhere in the intake form, not as a middle name, not as a guardian, just Mira Solano. The detail gnawed at him. Later, when Mira was wheeled back to the temporary recovery room to wait for results, Elias stepped in briefly to check on her condition. Hector stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes darting every few seconds to the hallway. "She okay?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. "Still in pain?" Elias replied, keeping his tone neutral. "We'll know more once I see the scans." He didn't ask about the necklace, not yet. Instead, he watched Mira, who now rested her head back against the vinyl cushion of the reclined chair. Her eyes fluttered closed, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Elias made an excuse to step away and returned to his office, where the X-ray images were beginning to load onto his monitor. The seconds stretched. When the first scan appeared, he stared, his breath caught. There were multiple dense shapes spread across the abdominal region, oval, uniform, and completely foreign to the body. At least 24, maybe more, some clustered near the stomach, others pushed toward the intestine. He leaned closer. Several of the capsules had irregular edges, almost like pressure was building within. Elias rubbed his temples. If even one of them ruptured patient rooms for safety. Mira was still asleep. But something new unfolded. She began to murmur. The audio feed was grainy, but Elias turned up the volume. Mira's lips moved faintly, her voice whisper-thin. "Leah? Hannah, no." Elias leaned in. The girl was dreaming or remembering. Her face twitched slightly, brows furrowed. "Don't take me back." Her voice barely registered a sound. Then, louder. "Please, don't tell them I said it. I didn't mean to." A cold chill ran through Elias. He replayed the snippet of audio twice. She had called herself Leah, not Mira. And the desperation in her voice wasn't random, it was specific. A cry from someone trapped between fear and truth. He checked her chart again. No aliases, no middle name listed, no history, no school records, no immunizations. Just a name on paper offered by a man who didn't let her speak. He stood abruptly and crossed the hallway toward radiology again. "I want those scans exported," he told the technician, "and backed up off-network, use the portable drive in my locker." "That serious?" the tech asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just a precaution," Eli replied. He didn't mention the capsules, not yet. The moment he did, it would stop being medical and become federal. He needed more than suspicion. Back in the room, Mira was awake now, sipping reluctantly at a paper cup of water. Hector stood beside her, but this time he was too distracted to stop her. She glanced up when Elias entered, her eyes wide and searching. Elias smiled gently, kneeling next to her. "How are you feeling now?" She hesitated, then shrugged. Elias kept his voice soft. "You said something earlier when you were resting." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "You said the name Leah." Hector stiffened. Mira's eyes flicked to him, then back to Elias. "Is that your name?" he asked, as calmly as he could. "Or is Mira your middle name?" Mira opened her mouth but said nothing. Her lip quivered, barely. Hector took a step forward. "She's tired. That's not important. We just need to go home after this." "Of course," Elias replied evenly. "Just one more test to review." He stood, but as he turned to leave, Mira did something unexpected. She reached forward quickly and tugged at his coat. Her hand was icy cold. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were screaming something he couldn't yet understand. Elias met her gaze and nodded once, a subtle silent promise that he saw her, that he believed her. Hector's phone buzzed. He turned away to answer it in Spanish, his voice tense, curt. Mira took the chance to slip something into Elias's hand. He didn't look at it until he stepped out. In his palm was a crumpled scrap of paper torn from the exam bed's disposable sheet. In shaky writing, 2 words: "Not my uncle." Dr. Elias Navarro closed the door to the consultation room softly behind him, his fingers still wrapped around the scrap of paper Mira had slipped him moments earlier. The 3 words, "Not my uncle," burning into his palm like a brand. He turned it over again, as if expecting more, but there was only her desperate scrawl and the unshakable weight of what it meant. He slid the paper into his inner coat pocket and made his way to the imaging suite, where the X-ray technician, a quiet man named Carl, was preparing the files for review. "You might want to see this," Carl muttered, tilting his monitor toward the black and white scan displayed Mira's abdominal region with haunting clarity. But what drew Elias's attention was not any ordinary sign of illness or obstruction. It was the dense, oval shapes lining the girl's intestines, each one unnaturally uniform in size, like bullets arranged in a bandolier. He counted quickly, the number climbing past 30, then 40, 47. 47 foreign bodies inside an 11-year-old child. His mouth went dry. "Can you zoom in here?" he asked, pointing to the upper right quadrant where some capsules clustered beneath the liver. Carl adjusted the settings. As the image sharpened, Elias leaned in closer, and that's when he saw it. Not all the capsules were solid. One appeared fractured, its contents faintly diffused into the surrounding tissue. Worse, several contained dark, needle-like slivers inside, not consistent with narcotics. They looked like microchips. Elias stared at the image, stunned. "These aren't just drug pellets," he said aloud. Carl looked at him. "Say again." "They embedded something else." He straightened up slowly, mind racing. "I need a full export of these files, and I need the clinic's main terminal access locked down." "Elias, what's going on?" Carl asked, concern creeping into his voice. "I don't know yet," the doctor replied, "but whatever this is, it's bigger than a stomachache." He moved fast now, heading back to the room where Mira was being monitored. She sat upright, her legs dangling off the bed, small hands gripping the edge of the mattress. Hector remained by the window, speaking into his phone in rapid Spanish. Elias entered without knocking, his expression calm, almost too calm. "We've finished the scans," he said. "Mira, I need to do a quick exam. Just one more thing." Hector lowered his phone slightly. "You already did an exam." "Not with the imaging results," Elias replied. "I need to check something I missed earlier." Hector stared at him for a long beat. "Fine," he said. "But I stay." Elias nodded. "Of course." He washed his hands slowly, deliberately, giving Mira time to understand he was trying to help. He put on gloves, then knelt beside the girl. "I need to look at your side, okay?" he said gently. "Left side, right below your ribs. Just breathe normal." Mira didn't respond, but she didn't resist either. She lifted her shirt slightly, revealing a thin, puckered scar near her lower ribs. Ellis's heart sank. It was jagged, asymmetrical, and the sutures, though healing, looked hand-stitched. crude, the kind used in makeshift settings without proper surgical tools. He didn't have to press. The skin there was already tender, slightly inflamed. "Did this happen recently?" he asked. Mira's eyes flicked up at Hector, then away. "She fell," Hector interrupted. "Sharp rock. Camping trip? I stitched it myself." Elias didn't move. "You're a medic?" Hector stiffened. "In the army. Once." Elias nodded again, tucking that information away. "Any fever? Vomiting?" he asked Mira, directing the questions gently. Again, she didn't answer, but the faint shake of her head was enough. "All right," Elias said softly, pulling her shirt down. "We're done for now." He stepped out of the room and found Janet at the nurse's station. "We need an ambulance," he said under his breath. "And not just for transport. We need law enforcement." Her eyes widened. "What's happening?" "We've got a child with potentially lethal contraband inside her," he replied, "and possible trafficking signals. Keep them here. No one leaves." Janet nodded and moved fast, pretending to check supplies, while signaling discreetly to the head nurse. Elias returned to his office and opened a secure line to a contact he hadn't called in years, Dr. Lena Zhao, a forensic pathologist and former DEA advisor who owed him a favor from their internship days. When she answered, her voice was groggy. "Elia, you know what time it is?" "Lena, I've got a child, 11 years old, 47 capsules. Most look like drugs, but some aren't. Possibly RFRBI implants, maybe encrypted data stores. I need a read on this." "Send me the scans," she said, suddenly awake. "And keep the patient stable. If one of those chips ruptures and it's data sensitive, it could be destructive to temperature or pressure changes. Chases." He hit send, attached the X-ray images, and glanced out the window. Hector was still pacing, still watching. Elias didn't like the energy, too aware, too alert, like he was calculating exit strategies with every second that passed. His hand hovered over the phone again, ready to call the sheriff's department directly, but something stopped him. If Hector sensed anything before help arrived, he'd disappear, and Mira would go with him. He needed a distraction, something to stall Hector just long enough. He returned to the room with a clipboard in hand. "We're going to monitor her overnight," he said calmly. "We don't want to risk complications." Hector stepped forward. "You said it was a stomach bug. Now it's overnight?" Elias nodded, keeping his voice even. "Standard for dehydration cases in kids. IV fluids. Observation? We'll get her a bed ready." Hector didn't look convinced, but before he could argue, Mira groaned softly and leaned over, clutching her stomach. She wasn't faking. Her face turned gray, sweat beating on her upper lip. Elias rushed to her side, heart pounding. He knew what was happening. One of the pellets was leaking, or worse. The shift in Mira's condition was sudden and violent, so much so that even Hector flinched as she curled into herself on the examination cot, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her hands gripped the sheet as if bracing against a wave of pain crashing through her torso. Her eyes rolled slightly before fixing on the overhead lights, unfocused and dilated. "She needs help, now," Elias said, his voice cutting through the confusion like a... He rushed to the cabinet, grabbing a saline IV bag and snapping into action, ordering Janet over the intercom to prep emergency support. Mira gasped, shallow and rapid, her chest rising in sharp jerks. Foam began to collect in the corner of her lips, her skin turning a sickly shade of gray-blue. "She's crashing," Elias muttered, slamming the call button. "Code yellow, pediatric." Hector moved quickly, too quickly. Before Elias could even attach the IV, Hector shoved the doctor backward with surprising force and yanked Mira up by her arm. "What are you doing?" Elias shouted, regaining his balance, his heart hammering. "She's overdosing. If we don't act now, she'll..." But Hector had already pulled a short, curved blade from inside his boot and held it low and close to his thigh, hidden from anyone but Elias. The look in his eyes wasn't fury. It was fear, raw and unfiltered. "I said no hospitals," Hector hissed. "No police, no scans. This isn't about you," Elias snapped. "She's dying. That pellet is leaking. She needs Narcan, irrigation, and possibly emergency surgery. She needs to come with me," Hector said, gripping the girl tighter. Mira tried to protest, her breath thin, her voice barely audible. Her body sagged under Hector's grip. "You're going to kill her," Elias said flatly. "If you walk out that door with her now, she won't survive." That was when Hector did the unthinkable. He slashed the curtain open with the knife and shoved Elias aside again, this time hard enough to knock him into a cabinet. Mira whimpered weakly, her legs dragging as Hector carried her toward the side corridor that led to the clinic's rear exit. Janet rounded the corner just in time to see them vanish. "Security! Rear exit!" Elias yelled, stumbling to his feet, blood seeping from a shackle coat on his forearm. "Sealed the building, now!" But by the time the clinic's outdated alarm system began its slow wail and the emergency lights flickered on, Hector and Mira were already gone. Outside, the desert air hit like a slap, hot and dry, clinging to the skin. Hector ran, half dragged, half carrying the girl past a row of utility sheds behind the clinic. Mira's head lolled against his chest, and for a moment he stumbled, unable to carry her weight and hold the blade at once. He ducked behind the largest shed, kneeling beside her on the gravel. "Stay with me," he whispered, tapping her cheek. "Come on, little one, don't quit on me." Mira barely responded, her breath hissing in and out like air from a leaking tire. Sweat pooled along her brow, and her skin was now pale enough to reflect the moonlight. Hector looked around. No sirens yet, no footsteps. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial and syringe, fumbling with the cap. "Just enough to keep you stable?" he muttered, sliding the needle into her thigh with practiced hands. Her body flinched slightly, then settled. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment she opened them just enough to look at him. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. Hector swallowed hard. "I know, but we're not going back, I promise." But the tremor in his hands told another story. Back inside the clinic, Elias patched the gash on his arm with gauze and disinfectant while updating local law enforcement over a scrambled line. "Name's Hector something, no ID, but claims military background. The girl's condition is critical. She has crapsients inside her. One of the capsules has ruptured. She won't last long without medical intervention." The deputy on the other end cursed under his breath. "If she's a mule and one of those things is leaking, that's a Class A emergency. Narcotic poisoning, right?" "Worse," Elias said. "There's tech embedded too, chips, maybe trackers. I don't know the payload, but it's more than street-grade smuggling." "All right," the deputy said. "We'll send out drones and patrols. If they're still nearby, we'll find them." Elias hung up and turned to Janet. "If we don't get her back in the next hour, we'll lose her." "What about the scans?" she asked. "Encrypted and backed up," he replied. "Off network." Janet hesitated. "You think he's still close?" Elias nodded. "He's not running, not really. He had 1,000 chances to disappear before. He's stalling. He's waiting on something." At the edge of the clinic property, Hector repositioned Mira on his lap, brushing her hair from her face. The drug had stabilized her, barely, but he knew it was a matter of time. The capsule leaking inside her gut was probably synthetic heroin or fentanyl, strong enough to kill a grown man in seconds. Mira was barely 70 pounds. He looked at the burner phone in his pocket, its screen cracked and unlit. He'd already made the call. They were coming, but he didn't know if they'd arrive in time. More importantly, he didn't know if they would still honor the trade. From a distance, the faint buzz of a patrol quad echoed over the desert. Hector pulled Mira deeper into the shadows, hunching low, blade still in hand. He pressed his ear to her chest, listening to her heartbeat, erratic, shallow, fading. He cursed under his breath and reached into his boot again, this time pulling out a second vial, darker, unmarked. He stared at it for a long second, then at the girl. "Just a little longer," he whispered, gripping her hand tightly, hoping she could still hear him, even if only faintly. The night had turned ink back as Elias Navarro left the clinic grounds, guided only by instinct, dread, and the barely discernible boot prints in the desert dust that led away from the rear of the building. The patrol quad had passed without incident, but it had bought him the time he needed to grab his med bag, a flashlight, and his old field radio, devices he hadn't touched since his days with the Red Cross in war zones. He kept the flashlight low to the ground, following the smudges in the dirt, footprints uneven, urgent, small drops of dark liquid trailing beside them. Blood. Mira's. He moved silently, each step deeper into the arid dark, until the footprints veered left toward an industrial structure outlined by the pale glow of the moon. It sat half swallowed by sand, rust clinging to its corners, chain-link fencing sagging around its perimeter like the remnants of a forgotten prison. The place had once been a slaughterhouse, back when this area had a cattle economy. Now it stood abandoned, or so people assumed. Elias crept around the outer fence, stepping over the collapsed wire, and approached the loading dock. The heavy door was slightly ajar, and from within came the low hum of electricity, and something else, sterile, mechanical, the unmistakable rhythm of a ventilator. He stepped inside slowly, adjusting to the dim light cast by flickering fluorescence. The smell hit first. Bleach, alcohol, and something beneath that was unmistakably metallic. A hallway stretched in front of him, lined with tarps that separated makeshift rooms from one another. To his left, a tray of surgical tools lay on a gurney next to a worn plastic tub filled with cloudy water. Blood had stained the tile underneath. Elias's breath caught as he heard soft wheezing from further down, followed by a sharp hiss, then stopped cold as he entered the central chamber. In the center stood an operating table, real steel elevated, and on it lay Mira, her tiny body strapped at the ankles and wrists, an oxygen mask fitted over her face. Her shirt had been cut away, replaced by a sterile cloth that exposed her abdomen, where a red pen had drawn incision marks. Beside her, two figures moved efficiently. One was a woman with gloved hands and a surgical gown, but no visible face, her head covered with a pink plush bunny mask that looked grotesque against the surgical backdrop. The other was taller, bulkier, wearing a stained lab coat and a mask shaped like a deer's head, its plastic antlers chipped and lopsided. Elias froze, horrified. The masked deer turned toward him and spoke, voice distorted by a voice changer clipped at the collar. "You're late," Hake said, "but we waited." Elias didn't move. "What is this?" he managed to whisper. "She's dying, and you're the only one who can keep her alive long enough," the deerhead said. "We've done enough prep. You handle the removal. Capsule count is 47. We need 38 intact." "You're insane," Elias breathed. "These are drugs. She's a child. She's going septic." "We know," the bunny-masked assistant replied, her voice higher-pitched, almost cheerful. "That's why you're here. You have a license. We've read your file." "I'm not doing this," Elias said firmly, stepping back. "Let me take her to a real hospital." "She won't make it there," the deerhead replied. "She'll die in the hallway while they wait for clearance." He stepped closer, looming over Elias. "Or you can save her. And us. And yourself." From the corner, a shadow moved. Hector. He emerged with his gun drawn, limping slightly, his face drenched in sweat. "You'll do it," he said quietly. "If you don't, she dies anyway. At least here, you have the tools." "This isn't medicine," Elance snapped. "It's butchery." "It's survival," Hector said, though his voice broke. "Don't make me force you, please." Elias looked again at Mira. Her chest was barely rising, her skin ghost pale. The monitor beside her beeped a rhythm that was increasingly irregular. Her vitals were crashing. The incision site was sterilized but untouched. No cuts had been made yet. They'd waited. "You said 38 intact?" Elias said, his voice steady now, switching into clinical mode. "What happens to the rest?" "2 ruptured already," the deerhead said. "Flushed what we could. The others non-critical." "Take a look at her back," he echoed. "They're filled with chips," the bunny replied. "Nothing that leaks." Elias approached the tray, noting the instruments. Clean, not hospital grade, but sanitized. The table had restraints with locking magnets. Someone had put serious funding into this setup. He looked up at Hector. "You better pray she survives this," he said, picking up the scalpel with shaking hands. The deerhead doctor stepped back. "You have 15 minutes, then the van comes." "What van?" Elias asked. "The one that takes you with the packages," the deer said. "And her," Elias blinked. "You expect me to go with her?" "She's not out of the game yet," the deer said flatly. "She's still valuable. You're now responsible for ensuring delivery." Hector looked away, shame plain on his face. Elias swallowed, turned toward the table, and placed his gloved hand gently on Mira's forehead. Her skin was burning up. He whispered, "I'm so sorry, Leah," Deacon said, and made the first incision. The scalpel in Elias's hand trembled slightly as he hovered over Mira's distended abdomen, sweat beating at his brow despite the chill in the room. Every instinct inside him screamed to stop, to grab the girl and run, but there was nowhere to go and no one to help. Not here, not now. He could feel Hector's presence at his back, hovering silently like a ghost with a gun, and the deer-headed surgeon standing just beyond the light, arms folded, waiting. Mira's vitals flickered on the monitor beside him, too high, too unstable. He'd made the first incision, a shallow cut along the upper abdominal line, and already he saw the sheen of the gelatinous capsule peeking through the tissue like a serpent in its nest. His gloved fingers moved with reluctant precision as he began isolating the first pellet, gently freeing it from the surrounding organs. "One down," he muttered, placing it into a sterile tray lined with gauze. The bunny-masked assistant took it wordlessly and backed away, retreating into the shadows. But then, from behind him, a rough voice growled, "He's too slow. She won't last." The deer-headed figure stepped forward again, tapping the side of his mask. "Time's not our ally, Doctor." Elias ignored him and focused on the next capsule, removing it with more confidence this time. His hands moved automatically, guided by years of trauma medicine and battlefield triage. But Mira moaned faintly under the mask, and he paused. She was semi-conscious. He had to stabilize her, but this room didn't have the drugs or tools necessary. His mind raced. If he could buy time, if he could pretend to comply longer, maybe an opportunity would present itself. As he reached for the third capsule, the deerhead said, "To which you're too emotionally compromised." Elias looked up sharply. "I'm the only reason she's still alive. Then she's as good as dead," the deer said coldly. "Step away. Now." A tense silence followed. Hector didn't move, but his jaw clenched. Elias stepped back slowly. "If you kill her, your product is worthless." "Then she dies worthless," the deer retorted. But before anyone could move, the bunny assistant touched the deer's arm. "Let me show him." "Show me what?" Elias asked, wiping blood from his gloves. "Where the others went," the bunny said in that same eerie sing-song voice. "It'll help him understand the stakes." The deer nodded once. "Take him?" Elias hesitated. "And the girl?" "She's on ice for now," the deer replied. "You'll be back." The bunny-maked figure gestured for Elias to follow, leading him down a narrow hallway behind a rusted steel door. The temperature dropped sharply. They passed what appeared to be holding rooms, makeshift cells lined with padded mats, dim red lights, and medical waste bins. The air smelled of bleach and despair. Then they stopped at the last door on the left. The bunny knocked once, then opened it. Inside was a boy no older than 13, sitting on a dirty mattress, his wrists chained to a pipe on the wall. He looked up, his eyes sunken and rimmed with fatigue, but still fiercely alert. His face was narrow, freckled, his dark hair hanging in damp strands across his forehead. He had no shirt on, and his chest and stomach were crisscrossed with scars, some old, some fresh, all surgical. Elias stared in horror. "Rail," the bunny said softly. "This is the doctor." The boy didn't flinch. He sat straighter and nodded once. "You're the new cutter?" "No," Elias replied quickly. "I'm not part of this, but you cut her," Rail said. "I saw. You're one of them now." "They didn't have a choice," Elias said, stepping closer. "Neither did I," Rail said, holding up his hand so Elias could see the swollen wrists bound in the metal cuffs. "They don't ask, they just take." Elias knelt beside him. "How long have you been here?" "Too long," Rail said. "But not the longest?" "How many others?" Elias asked. "Before you?" Rail's mouth twitched. "5, he said simply. 5 kids, same setup, same rules." "And what happened to them?" Elias asked, already fearing the answer. Rail's gaze dropped to the floor. "The ones that survived, they were used again. The others, they took what they could. Livers, kidneys, corneas." He tapped a scar on his side. "You think these are from smuggling?" "No, these are leftovers. They take what sells." Elias's stomach churned. "And you?" "They say I'm next," Rail replied. "They say I'm too damaged to smuggle now, so I get harvested." Elias looked around the room. No cameras, just a single overhead bulb, a tray of basic meds, and a drain in the corner. "Has anyone ever tried to escape?" "One girl," Rail said. "Last year." "They caught her," "What happened?" Elias asked. Rael didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence told the story. The bunny stood in the doorway, her arms crossed now, head tilted like a curious child. "He's a good boy," she said. "Smart. He doesn't scream anymore." "You're monsters," Elias spat, standing. "You know that?" "We're businessmen," she replied. "Not yet," she said, her voice dipping lower. "But you will be." Elias stormed out of the cell, fury pulsing through every step as the bunny-macked assistant silently closed the door behind him. He didn't look back at Rael, but the boy's words clung to his thoughts like burrs, too damaged to smuggle next to be harvested. It was a phrase that shouldn't exist, not in any world remotely resembling sanity, yet here it was, standard protocol in a place where children's lives were boiled down to capsules and cost per gram. The hallway led him back into the central chamber where Mira remained sedated on the table, her small chest rising and falling shallowly beneath the surgical drapes. Her color had stabilized slightly, a faint flush returning to her cheeks from the adrenaline injections the bunny had administered while he was gone. The deer-headed surgeon stood at the opposite side of the table, studying a black case now opened to reveal a padded interior lined with foam, each depression shaped precisely to hold one of the extracted capsules. So far, 10 slots were filled, labeled in red marker. But it was the slot marked 42A that caught Elias's eye, the only one not shaped like the others. Its chamber was rounded, shielded in metallic lining, and labeled with a 3-digit code he didn't recognize. "What's that?" he asked sharply, pointing. The deerhead looked up slowly. "Insurance," he said. "Her father was a trader. We made sure she would never be Elias blinked. "What do you mean?" "That capsule," the deer said, tapping the metal net, "was embedded near the small intestine, not just for transport, but for protection. It contains encrypted location data, names, drop sites, network nodes. If we lose a shipment, we don't lose the map." "She's a human flash drive," Elias said bitterly. "She's more than that," the deer corrected. "She's the last living trace of her bloodline. Her father tried to bring us down. He failed. She's the penalty and the tool." Elias stared at him, horror knitting into realization. "That's why you haven't killed her. That's why she's not just another mule." "Exactly," the deer replied. "That chip is sealed in a heat-sensitive casing. If it ruptures or is removed incorrectly, the encryption self-erases. We've had it locked inside her for over a year." Elias felt bile rise in his throat. "You've been using an 11-year-old girl to store coordinates to a human trafficking operation?" "We've done worse," the bunny said sweetly from behind, but this was the most poetic. "And her father?" Elias demanded. "Where is he now?" "Dead," the deer replied flatly. "He tried to sell us out to the feds. Failed. Got a bullet to the spine for his trouble, but not before we found out he encrypted everything and tied the key to biometric recognition. Hers. So, even if you have the chip, you need her alive to access it," Elias said, his voice shaking. "Precisely," the deer confirmed. "And now you see why you're here. We can't open it without killing her. You're the only one who's gotten close enough to extract without triggering the heat seal." Elias stared at Mira's face, now so peaceful it betrayed none of the trauma beneath her skin. "She doesn't know," he said. "Does she?" "Not fully," the bunny replied, "but she dreams, she remembers things. She's starting to piece it together. Which is why we don't have much time." The deer leaned in closer. "We need the chip, we need the data, and we need her alive for the handoff." Elias's voice was low, dangerous. "Who's taking the handoff?" "The buyer's already en route," the deer said. "Cartel subsidiary. They want to relocate the network, burn everything here, move east. New cities, new names, new kids, and she's part of the sale." "She is the sale," the deer said coldly. With the data and her biometric key, they can clone the drop points, reassign codes, restructure every route from Laredo to Los Angeles. Elias turned away, hands gripping the tray until his knuckles went white. Every fiber in his being screamed that he needed to get Mira out of here, now, but the walls felt thicker than ever. He looked around, searching for any hint of weakness in the room's design, any opportunity. That was when Mira stirred faintly, her fingers twitching beside her thigh. She was coming to. He knelt beside her quickly, whispered so only she could hear. "Leah. Mira, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. "They told me you're the key," he said softly. "Your father? They didn't tell you the truth. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded faintly, once. "Good," he said, eyes darting toward the deer head. "We'll get out of here, but you need to stay calm." She whispered something, barely audible. He leaned closer. "Not all of it's inside me," she said, her voice raw. "Here's another piece." He hit it. "My tooth." Elias pulled back in shock. "What?" he said. "If they find the chip, they'll think it's everything," she said, "but it's not. It's just the front door." Elias felt his mind crack open. "He split the encryption," he murmured. "A decoy chip and the key stored in her dental implant." He rose quickly. "She needs dental x-rays," he said to the deer head. "Immediately." "What are you talking about?" the deer asked. "Her pain's worsening," Elias lied. "There may be a spread of infection to the jaw. If we lose her to sepsis, your chip is gone." The deer paused, then nodded. "Do it fast. If she codes, you'll join her in the fire." As the portable dental x-ray machine hummed quietly in the corner, Elias adjusted the lead apron over Mira's chest, pretending calm as he positioned the sensor behind her molars. The deer maze cartridges stood by the doorway, arms folded, suspicious but compliant for now. Mira's breathing was shallow but steady. Her pupils dilated slightly from the sedatives, and Elias knew he had only minutes before she either slipped too deep or the deer grew impatient. He captured 3 rapid exposures and removed the device, pulling the tablet close to review the images. On the lower left quadrant, beneath a porcelain crown that looked too pristine for a girl with no dental history, he saw it. An opaque fragment embedded in the root canal, just large enough to house a microchip. A second key, just as Mira said. His pulse jumped. They'd never suspect something so subtle. That sliver in her tooth could be the real encryption key, while the chip in her gut was only bait. He turned back to the deer-headed figure. "There's an abscess forming," he lied. "Could spread fast. If we don't drain and stabilize, she'll crash before the handoff." "Then stabilize her," the deer said coldly. "No more delays." Hexa had reappeared beside the surgical tray, silent and withdrawn, gloves on, face unreadable. Elias glanced at him for the first time in hours, seeing now not just a handler or enforcer, but something fractured beneath the surface. "I need suction and precision tools," Elias muttered. "This isn't a standard case." The bunny assistant moved to comply, and as she did, Elias leaned slightly toward Hector, keeping his voice just above a whisper. "You were a medic once. In the army?" Hector didn't look at him. "Afghanistan? 2 tours. Trauma surgeon? So why this?" Elias asked. "Why them?" Hector's jaw tightened. "'Cause they took mine." For a moment the room fell away. Elias didn't move, didn't blink. He waited. Hector finally looked up, his voice dry as desert wind. 3 years ago, I had a daughter. Her name was Camilla. My wife was Lucia." His eyes glazed over. "I got a call during a shift. My wife and Camilla were missing. I thought it was a mistake. They weren't even involved in anything. But it wasn't about them. It was about me. I treated a soldier who refused to cooperate with these people. He tried to desert with intel. I packed him up. They found out. They punished me." Elias's throat felt tight. "They used them to control you?" Hector nodded. "Camilla was only 9. They told me if I worked for them, they'd be safe. So I did. I built med rooms like this one. I trained people I hated, and still, it wasn't enough." "What happened to them?" Elias asked, already dreading the answer. "One night," Hector said slowly, "they brought in a girl for extraction. Complications, internal bleeding. They said she'd swallowed bad product. I was forced to operate. No anesthesia. No prep, just orders. I didn't recognize her at first, not until I saw the birthmark on her rib cage." Elias froze. Hector's voice cracked. "It was Camilla, my daughter. They never told me. They used her in the system like any other child." "Like she was nothing?" Elias stared in horror. "She died? Right there," Hector whispered, "on my table. Bled out before I could finish. And they burned the body before I could even bury her." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the machines seemed to pause. Elias swallowed hard. So Mira, she's not yours. Hector shook his head. She's someone else's daughter. I was told to move her, but when I saw her face, her fear, I couldn't do it again. I've been trying to find a way to break her out ever since. Then help me, Elias said. Tonight, Hector's hands curled into fists. There's no door that doesn't lead back to them. No way out that doesn't cost blood. Then let it be theirs, Elias said firmly. Not hers. Hector didn't answer right away. He glanced at the tray of capsules, then back to Mira, then at the deer-head figure who was now reviewing documents on a separate screen. Finally, Hector exhaled. There's a generator room behind the East Hall. If you can trigger an overload, we'll have power for 7 minutes. That's your window, you? Elias asked. They'll know you helped? I'll stall them, Hector said. Say she coded, blame you. Buy enough time for you to reach the canyon road. She can't walk, Elias said. We'll need transport. There's a van in the back, Hector replied. T-shirt taped under the third seat. You sure about this? Elias asked. Because once we start, there's no turning back. Hector looked at Mira again, his face haunted. I should have done it the night Camila died. Maybe this is the closest I get to fixing it. Elias moved with a calculated urgency as he slipped into the side corridor just beyond the surgery room, the echo of his own footsteps dampened by the thick layers of dust and mold lining the forgotten hallways of the old slaughterhouse. Mira lay sedated but stable, Hector buying him precious minutes by pretending to recalibrate the IV drip and distract the deer-head surgeon with falsified oxygen statue. In Elias's left hand, buried under his surgical glove, sat the object he had not touched in over 5 years. His old service watch, a battered matte steel relic from his time in field medicine, retrofitted years ago by his then-wife, Elena Torres, a cybersecurity specialist turned federal border officer. It had been a personal gift from her before the divorce, reconfigured with a microtransponder keyed only to her unit's emergency frequency. He had never triggered it, never had a reason. Until now. He reached the far end of the hallway, ducked into a storage alcove filled with outdated medical crates, and slid the glove back to reveal the underside of the watch. A small, recessed button, black, unmarked, unnoticed by most, waited. Elias pressed and held it for 7 seconds. No beep, no vibration. But if it still worked, Elena would know, and she would come. 30 miles east, Officer Elena Torres was reviewing tactical logs at a remote field post near Nogales when her communications specialist leaned out from the monitor bay. Ma'am, you've got a flag ping from Echo 4. She looked up, eyes narrowing. I know, the tech said, but the signal's active. It's bouncing off an old emergency relay we never shut down. Elena stood quickly. Where? Just west of Caborca, near the old Barajas plant. You want me to run verification? No, she said, already strapping on her sidearm. Just patch it through to my car. He wouldn't press that unless he was dead or surrounded by something worse. She was out the door within seconds, tires spitting gravel as the cruiser shot toward the canyon highway. Back at the facility, Elias returned to the main room, his demeanor unchanged, as if nothing had transpired. Mira's vitals remained stable, her body temperature slightly improved after Hector flushed one of the failing IV lines with a saline dextrose mix. The deerhead was pacing now, checking his burner phone every 30 seconds, clearly growing anxious. Where's the van? He barked. Should have been here 10 minutes ago. The bunny responded. Route's clear, GPS shows movement. ETA 5 minutes. Double-check the seal count, the deer ordered, pointing to the capsule tray. We're not handing over defective product. Elias approached Mira quietly, whispering beneath his breath. Hold on, kid, just hold on. Outside, as night surrendered to the cold edge of dawn, 3 federal tactical units closed in on the compound's coordinates, guided by Elena's voice over the encrypted's comm. This place isn't on any map, she said. Expect tight corners, human shields, minimal lighting. Do not shoot unless you have visual. Her cruiser slid to a halt 2 blocks from the perimeter. She stepped out, checking her sidearm, her vest, her comms, then paused, staring at the photo clipped inside her ID badge. A little girl with curly brown hair and wide eyes smiled back at her. Her name had been Lucia, her niece taken during a custody dispute when Elena's sister was too deep into cartel debt to protect her. The case had gone cold in 2015. No sightings, no leads, just a hollow ache where a family used to be. But when the file for Mira Solana was flagged earlier that month for being incomplete, something had prickled in Alina's memory. The age, the name, the silence. And now, here she was, driving toward a slaughterhouse flagged by a man who hadn't spoken to her in years, wearing the same damned watch she had given him when she still believed in forever. She clicked her radio. "Units Bravo and Charlie, form outer perimeter. I'm going in with Alpha." Inside the operating room, the tension cracked open like dry plaster. The Deer's burner phone buzzed once, then again, and he hissed at the screen. "Change of plans," he muttered. "The buyer's early. We're moving now." "She's not ready," Elias said, standing between the table and the Deer. "She needs at least another hour for the sedative to wear off. Any faster, and she'll crash before you even reach the border." "Not my problem," the Deer growled. "We load and go." He turned toward the bunny. "Prep the crate." "Crate?" Elias snapped. "She's not livestock. She's a product," the Deer replied. "And you're disposable." But before he could finish the sentence, the lights flickered once, then went out completely, replaced by emergency strobes that pulsed red like arterial blood. A mechanical hiss followed, the distinct thump of blast doors locking somewhere in the lower corridor. "What the hell?" the Deer barked. "Generator's out," Hector said coolly. "Must have overloaded. Happens with old buildings." But Elias saw it in his eyes. The signal had reached Alina. She was here. The facility erupted into chaos. Outside, tactical boots pounded against gravel. Smoke grenades were launched through side vents. The first door blew inward with a concussive pop. Elena led the charge, flashlight beams slicing through the haze. "Federal police," she shouted. "Drop your weapon." The bunny shrieked and scrambled toward the back hallway. The Deer pulled a pistol, but Hector lunged, grabbing his arm, twisting it until bone cracked. The gun clattered to the floor. Elias grabbed Mira in both arms, pulling the IV line free, her body limp but breathing. Elena burst into the room seconds later, gun raised, eyes darting between targets. "Navarra?" "Here," he gasped. "I've got her." Her flashlight caught Mira's face, and everything stopped. Elia's world narrowed, breath trapped in her throat. The shape of the girl's jaw, the curve of her ear. A birthmark beneath her eye. "Lucia?" she whispered. Elias stood frozen as the floodlight haloed Mira's unconscious face, the name she hadn't heard in nearly a decade tumbling from her lips like a prayer caught between disbelief and aching memory. "Lucia," she whispered again, and in that instant the chaos behind her, the shouting, the thuds, the collapsing metal, blurred into silence as recognition bloomed in her chest like a slow detonation. Elias looked at her, his arm still cradling the fragile girl, and something passed between them, an unspoken oath that this time no child would be lost. But then the corridor behind them exploded in motion. A second wave of masked men, more organized, more violent, burst through the east wing, part of the deeper ring of the organization, the one sent to erase loose ends. One of them shouted in Spanish, "Take the drive, kill the rest." Before anyone could react, gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off surgical steel and concrete. Elias dropped low, shielding Mira's head with his body as Elena dove behind the overturned gurney. Hector stood in the open, unflinching. He reached into his coat and pulled something small, a crumpled photograph, bent at the corners, smudged with sweat and blood. He held it out to Elias. "For when she wakes up," Hector said quietly. Elias took it, heart twisting as he saw the image, a smiling girl in a sundress, arms around Hector's neck, a moment frozen before it all turned to ash. "Camila," Hector said, "tell her." "I tried to make it right." Then, without hesitation, Hector turned, raised the stolen pistol from earlier, and charged into the hallway, firing as he ran. His body took the brunt of the gunfire meant for Elias, buying them the seconds they needed. Elena returned fire with precision, dropping two of the advancing men before they could reach the threshold. Elena rose, clutching Mira, and followed Elena through the west corridor, where Bravo unit had reached the secondary exit. The last he saw of Hector was the way he fell, face first, silent, defiant. His final act, not of vengeance, but of redemption. 3 days later, Mira opened her eyes in the intensive care unit of a federal medical facility near Tucson, the beeping of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic forming her welcome back to life. Her first breath was sharp and painful but real, followed by a soft groan that stirred the nurse nearby. Moments later, Elias entered the room, his coat rumpled, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but warm as he knelt by her bed. "Hey," he whispered, "you made it." Mira blinked slowly, her lips dry. "Where's Hector?" Elias didn't answer at first. Instead, he pulled the photograph from his pocket and placed it gently in her hand. "He gave me this, said to tell you he did what mattered, for his daughter." "And for you?" Mira stared at the picture, her eyes filling as she traced the face of the girl she'd never met, but somehow understood. "He was kind," she murmured, "in his own way." Elena stepped in, hands clasped in front of her. She waited until Mira's eyes met hers before she spoke. "You probably don't remember me," she said softly, "but you knew my voice once. I used to sing to you when you were a baby." Mira frowned, her lips parting. "Lucia," Elena said, "that's your name, my sister's daughter. You disappeared in 2015. We thought we lost you forever." Mira looked between the two adults, her mind spinning, her identity cracking open, reshaping. I'm not Mira." "You are now," Elias said gently. "But you were born Lucia Torres, and you have people who never stopped looking." In the weeks that followed, the data recovered from the capsule embedded in Mira's tooth and the decoy chip in her abdomen led to one of the largest coordinated raids on trafficking networks in recent federal history. 4 major supply routes were shut down, 2 cartel lieutenants were captured, 32 children were rescued across state lines. Elias testified before capture, and Elias provided sealed medical reports that became case law. But behind the legal victories and televised briefings, a quiet truth took shape, one written in the daily rhythms of a home rebuilt from the wreckage. Elias, long estranged from family, found himself returning each evening not to silence, but to the soft hum of a kitchen where someone was learning to cook again. Mira, now Lucia again, split her time between therapy sessions and guitar lessons. Elena, despite the demands of her badge, spent every weekend at the small house near the edge of the desert, where they tended to a garden Lucia had planted in honor of those who hadn't made it. And sometimes, late at night, when the nightmares still came, Lucius would wake to find Elias sitting quietly at her doorway, book in hand, just watching. "I'm here," he'd say, and she would believe him. If this story left you speechless like it did us, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our next mystery. We're curious, what part of Mira's journey shocked you the most? Was it Hector's secret, the chip hidden in her tooth, or the final twist in the hospital? And one more thing, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We read every single one. Your support keeps stories like this alive.